Hey guys, let's start our new video in the Python training series. So as usual, we'll go to browser and say online Python interpreter and open the first link, and we can delete whatever is here, and let's start. So till now we have got a basic idea of how to print stuff, what are strings and string functions, a bit of information about Boolean data type, and we also saw how to get input from a user, typecasting, how you cast a string into an integer, and then a bit of print formatting, how do you write a mixture of variables and constants in and strings in print statements. And we also did string concatenation. In a last video we worked on conditional statements, if, else, elif, else structure. So this is mostly from video 3, Python 3 video. This one we covered in Python 1, Python 1, and string functions and Boolean data type we covered in Python 2. This is mostly from Python 1, Python 1, Python 1, and Python 1. So this is what we have done so far. So let's move forward now into a little bit of uh, further concepts into Python. So suppose I have a list of things. Suppose I have a list of numbers. Now you can't write a list of numbers like this. You can't assign to a single variable like this in Python. If you just run this, this is gonna, oh, it accepts somehow, but like it just, let's see if it prints. This is something new into it. Oh, it still works. It just took into something called a tuple. We are gonna work on it later. But if you want to have a list, so this is a proper way of entering things in Python. So this is a list of 5 numbers. So, and if you say print C, this is going to print like this. Well, we'll also try to do what we did earlier and see what it does. And let me tell you what's the difference there. What's the difference between writing the numbers like this and writing the numbers like this? Now, if I say, now this has overwritten, let's call it D. And then let's see if we say print C comma D here. Okay, so there is a bit of difference over here. So these values in square brackets, whenever you write values in square brackets, in square brackets form a list, and the values in parentheses form a tuple. So these are two data types that we are going to learn today. We'll focus more on lists, less on tuples, but they're both important. I'm also going to tell you the difference between list and tuple. Now, when you're generating a tuple, I think you should also be able to do it like this. It's one and the same thing. Either you put the parentheses or not, it's going to generate a tuple for you. Now let's look at the lists first. Now this is a list, and I can generate a string list also. You can have uh, I am a boy. It's going to accept that, right? And you can also have a mixture of uh, string and numbers. I, 1, 2, 3. This is going to work. I think you can also generate a list with Boolean variables, true, and a mixture of Boolean variables with other data types and false. Now, see, remember, I don't know whether I emphasized this enough or not, but this, when at the moment you write true and false like this is not a string. This is a Boolean variable. So these are reserved keywords for Boolean variables, true and false over here. Okay, so now you can generate a list like this. Let's write the list names separately. We can print them, but they're already visible. We can print them. C, D, E, F. We can add the escape characters. Escape sequences in between. But then because we are adding these string escape sequences, we need to make sure the commas are all right. Okay, and let's move forward here. So this is what we got as list. List is a really important data type. We can do a bunch of operations using this. For example, you can say, so if C is a list, we can say C dot pop, and let's see what happens. Let's see if we say print, just add it into a print and see what does it print if I say C dot pop. So what it did was it just popped out the last element of the list, and what we can do is, so we if we say C dot pop, and then next if we say print C, does it print? So it just prints the remaining list. So you can pop a last element from the list, and then you can have the rest of the list there. Now this suggests that list is something called mutable, which means you can edit the list, you can change stuff and all, but you can't do this with tuples. So suppose you have a tuple here, one, and that's a main difference between a list and tuple. One difference is the syntax. You can either write a tuple like this, or you can just generate a tuple like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this both of these are going to work. But the problem is you can't do a pop on a tuple. So suppose if I say e dot pop, it it gives an error because tuple object has no attribute pop, and it's also not mutable. You can't just add or do anything. With lists you can do a lot of stuff like this. Suppose I want to do c dot append, and let's see if this works. Yeah, and if I just say print c, now it's it appended one extra thing at the end. You can append a boolean variable. You can just say c dot append true. It's gonna append it true there. Yeah, so you got the number of elements right. If I just want to say e dot append or d dot append, and it says it does not have that attribute. And there is another thing we can do. There is some, this thing is common in lists and tuples, that's called indexing. Now you have elements in a list, for example. We can, the way we did in strings, in the same way these list elements have indexes. So this is the first element of the list. and the indexes always start from 0. So this has the index of 0 essentially, and this has the index of 1, index of 2, index of 3, and index of 4. And so if I want to just get the first element of the list, I'm going to say print. Let's get rid of this to declutter everything. Print C0. This means I'm just printing the first element of the list. Or you can also do a slicing. So if I want to print everything from 0 to 3, this means it will print the element number 0 and 1. Number 3, as I told you, it's not going to count it in. So this I sliced through the list now and just uh, got these three numbers, right? And we can also reverse the list the way we were able to reverse the string. So mostly whatever operations, indexing operations you were able to do on strings, a lot of them work equally well for lists. For example, if I want to get the last element of the list, I want to print it, I can start from the reverse the way we did in strings in video 2. I'm just going to reiterate over here. So essentially, if you start the indexing from here, it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you start from the bottom, from the back, it says -1, -2, -3, -4, and -5. So suppose if I say -1 to -3, I want numbers from -1 to -3. Uh, oh, it's just going. Probably I should say -3 to -1. I'm not sure it's gonna work, but let's try. Is it gonna work? Yeah. So -3, it printed -3 and -2. Yeah. And I can also reverse the list. So suppose if I say the way we did earlier, starting, ending, an increment of -1, and it's gonna get the reverse list. So this is the same function we used in strings. For example, I can demonstrate it over here. So suppose I have a string that's equal to a b a b a b a c d e f, and if I say print string and colon colon -1, let's see what it does. So it just took it from the back and simply reversed it, and this is the same thing we can actually turn into actually do in a list. And so we learned three things in this: how to reverse a list, second, how to remove the last element from a list, how, I think they are look like questions. Let's add question marks at them. And then how to add a new element to the end of the list. So this is, so let's put them in this hashtag so that they come as comments, and then the computer is not angry at us while compiling the program. So how to reverse a list, that should be C colon colon -1. You can print it off. So this is a operation, and you can print the result using the print statement. Then you can how to remove the last element. You say C dot pop, and then you have to print C again, because if you just print C dot pop, it's gonna show you the last element. And then you can say C dot append, and now it's our C will have the 5 popped here because we did not bring it to the original thing, but we can bring it back and we say C dot append 5, and then we can print this. This is gonna give you a list. So let's see what it gives you. Oh, no, because we have appended, so we need to again do the same thing. We need to print it separately. So say print C, and let's see. Yeah, so you have this first function that has worked, this reversed the list, and we can also say it better, the reversed list is, and yeah, and the list after popping the last element is, and the list after appending the last element is, and then this is how it's gonna work. Let's see. Oh, I did a formatting mistake in line for the reversed. Oh, the reversed list is this. Yeah. So the reversed list is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and list after popping the last element, and the list after appending the last element is this. So these are three very simple functions in list. We can do more. Let's try this, the indexing. C0 equal to 5, print C. Let's see what it gives you. Yeah, so what I did was, this is a way of replacing. So how to replace a particular element, an element at a particular index in a list. So I wanted the element at the first index to be 5. So now this, right now we are not appending here, we are just um, replacing it. So the C0 is going to be 5, and that's how you can replace the element. You can probably say, let's try this. Uh, let's try this. I don't know how it works. Yeah. 5 2, no, 5 4. Yeah, so what I did was I replaced both the first and 0th index and first index, and as I said, this last number is not counted, it's just gonna say 0th and first index, and I just added these as a list like this. Let's try if it works like this. I don't think it's gonna work. It's gonna make it a tuple here. Oh no, it works. Yeah, so you can do either put them in a list because it understands that it's a list. You have C is already a list. Okay, and what there is another thing you can do actually. Let's try this. Let's see what it does. Now what it did is it added a tuple in a list. You can add the list elements can be anything actually. The list element, a list element can be a tuple, it can be a list, it can be boolean, it can be a string, it can be anything. Suppose let's add a list in a list. On the first element, try to add another list, 5 4. Let's run. Yeah, so now the first element of the list is a tuple, and the second element of the list, the first element of the list with index 0 is a tuple, and the second element of the list with index 1 is a list again. So it's essentially a list of uh, list in a list, and this is a tuple in a list, and you have simple numbers. Now there is another thing you can do now, how to access the indices of a list or a tuple in a list. How do you do that? So this is a tuple. Now if I just say tell it to print C0. Now what it's going to do is it's just going to print the first element, but the first element is a tuple. In the same way, if I tell it to print the first this second element with index 1, this is a list again, but I want to access the next element from here. Now how do you do that? So, or I want to just access this element, the first element of the tuple which is present at index 0 in the list. So let's try to do that. So then what we should do is print c 0. That's my first element, which is a tuple. Out of the tuple I want to access the first element of the tuple. Now this is going to give me 5. So what it means is the first index over here is the index within the list. So this tuple has an index of 0 in the list, but I want to access the first element out of the tuple. Now what's the index of this element within the tuple? Now the tuple also has indexes starting from 0. So this is 0 0 and it printed 5. So if I just say print and see and 0, which means I have the first element of the original list, which is a tuple, and from that tuple I'm accessing the second element, which has an index of 1. Now it's going to print 4 for me, and we can do the same thing with the next thing, which is a list, sublist, and a list. So I can say print c 0, not 0 because it's a second element of the list 1, and say 0, and print C 1 1, right? So it just gave me 5 or 4. You can just make the uh, list a bit different. Just say let's add a boolean variable, false, true, right? So this is how it works. You can generate more complex data types by adding things within a list. That's what we did. So suppose let's create a more complex data type. Uh, so 0 1 and 1 0 and 2 0 3 0, and then let's do a simple multiplication. So for example, prod 1 plot 1 is equal to c 0 0 star. So the first element of the first tuple, I want to multiply it with the first element of the second tuple. So this is the second tuple and the first element, and if I can say print prod 1. So I'm just doing operations on this because it was a 0. The first element of the first element of the first tuple, and the second element, first element of the second tuple, which is 1. When I multiplied this by this, it just gave me 0. You can do it with the first element. Uh, in this it's going to return me 1 because this is 1 multiplied 1 by 1. So this, for example, is useful for when we are working in with coordinate geometry. So these are two, it's a 2D space. You have a point with coordinates, x coordinate of 0 and y coordinate of 1, x coordinate of 1 and y coordinate of 0, x coordinate of 2 and y coordinate of 0, and so on and so forth. So these kind of operations are actually useful later when you work with more complex machine learning algorithms, for example, that predict the locations or coordinates For example, a more complex example of this would be these logistic companies which deliver the products like Skip the Dishes, or these companies like Uber or Lyft. They always need to locate the coordinates of the drivers and all. So these kind of data types are useful, whether you can create a list of the coordinates. These are 2D coordinates. You can essentially, there is no reason why you can't make a three-dimensional coordinate. You can uh, actually use a float data type also, which we haven't worked on till now. Essentially, you can have floating point operations. It's going to identify these are floats by itself, and you can have as many zeros as you like depending upon the precision that you're working with, and it's going to return these things. So these are useful operations in lists. And so let's just tie up everything. So you have a list, and you can do a popping, you can append the elements in the list, you can access the indexes of the different elements of a list, you can reverse the list, and a bunch of other functions. We also worked on tuples. Now, the main difference between a list and a tuple is tuples are immutable. You cannot append the things, you cannot take away the things. Once you have added the data type in a tuple, it's going to remain the same, it's not going to change. Uh, you just simply cannot change. So tuples are useful in circumstances where we just want to input the data and doesn't allow anyone to change it. Lists are more like when you want to keep updating the data. So then list as a data type is more useful in those cases, right? So, and then let's see what else we can do. Let's try to do this. List 1 is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. List 2 is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can try to see if I generate list 3 equal to list 1 plus list 2, and say print list 3. Let's see if it works. Yeah, so it just simply added these elements there. Can we do star? Let's see how it works. No, it's not. It can't multiply list, that's obvious. uh, so it can't do this, of course. Plus is the only thing. Now why plus works is because it works more like concatenation, the way we concatenated the string. And that's how it works in the list, because operations are really simple, similar. Like in strings also, you can't have string 1 minus string 2, and so on and so forth. And okay, so there is another thing that might work. So if we say print list 1 plus list 2, that's what this is. But if I want to say print list 3 star 3, now what it did was the way it does in strings. So in strings, when we had a star multiplied by 3, it just printed the star 3 times. Now this repeated the elements of the list 3 times. So that's how this star function works over here. You take a list and you can just simply multiply it. And this is probably not going to work, because again you have a list data type which acts more like a string, and you simply cannot add a integer there. Okay, and let's try another thing. So if I have a string, let's see if this works. A B C, and new list is equal to list of string. Let's see if this works. Yeah, this works. So let's print li, and yeah, so this is more like again typecasting. So what you have done is you have created a list out of a string. Now this works beautifully and automatically over here, because Python knows that strings have these characters, and each character has an index there. It just picks up each character from the index and then just make it a list element, and that's how it works. Probably if I have this number 1 2 3, let's see what it does over here. No, it can't, because this number is not simply not iterable. Integers are not iterable. Integers do not have indices like these. But if you just change it to a string again, it works. So the strings can be changed into lists. And let's try another thing. If I have a list again, 1 2 3 4, and if I say str new is equal to string, let's see if this works. Yeah, so let's say print str new, just changed it to a string but kept everything over here. And if I say print str new, and then uh, zeroth element. Oh yeah. So what it did was it just simply converted this into a string. Now this is not a list right now. It just is a complete string where each of the things what you see is an element of the string. So this thing has an index of 0 in the string, index 1, and then comma has an index of 2. Suppose I want to say string new 2. So now this, it typecasted it back. Now earlier what we did was we changed string to a list, and now we changed list to a string. Now that's really interesting there. So I think that's enough for this video. We learned what is a list today, what's a tuple, and how to do simple list operations, how we typecast a string to a list or a list to a string. These are really interesting. You can also have, as I said, essentially two-dimensional lists or 3D lists, where we have, for example, tuples there, or some 2D features and you can access the indices like this, 1 1 and so on and so forth. And so how to access list indices in lists with more complex data types. And that's it today for today. And in the next video we are going to learn actually how to iterate over the list. So we will learn a special loop that works very well for strings and lists, that's called a for loop. And we are going to end the video over here for today. Thank you very much for your attention.